Hi everyone, I am at a hotel in Brisbane at the moment. I was scheduled to speak at a conference at the IWD Meanjin Brisbane conference on Friday, and because of Cyclone Alfred is cancelled, and I'm trying to get a flight back home. So I won't be speaking. However, I've got a few hours to kill as I wait for things to happen at the airport, and I thought I'd do the speech anyway. My speech is called A Hill to Die On, and the preamble is that I'll be speaking today from my own perspective. I won't be speaking for anyone else, any organisation or individual. This speech is born out of my experiences and my opinions, and it's not intended to refer to anyone in particular, and there's you can take what you will from it, really. So let's go. A hill to die on. This gender-critical movement started out driven by feminists, many of whom were lesbians. It was the feminists that sounded the alarm, and it was the measured, logical, intelligent, and dignified approach that convinced me I was on the right side of history when I became involved. When I first became aware of the movement in 2016, I did my due diligence. I read and listened to the TRAs, and I read and listened to the TERFs. I used my critical thinking skills, I did my research, I looked up my own facts. The trans side made no sense to me. It was illogical, redundant, and aggressive. The TERF side had the academics, the writers, the science, and the outright charisma, Magdalene Burns anyone. And so I forged ahead, feeling I was fighting the good fight, firmly believing that the ideology was detrimental to the human psyche, and the methods are so painfully obvious and so poisonous, nothing good could come of it. I do look back at myself and see some naivety, because my involvement in this movement hasn't been entirely positive. At times it's been very negative. I've lost jobs, friends, and much more to this movement, not to mention I've gained a little bit of PTSD from Albert Park. At the beginning of 2023, I was part of the organising group for the Let Women Speak events in Auckland and Wellington. It was that event, that Auckland event, that the foreshadowing of a pivotal time for me began, and which ran parallel in many ways to the changes in the women's rights movement in New Zealand. I was one of the two organisers who attended the Let Women Speak event in Albert Park in Auckland on the 25th of March 2023, where mob violence against women was implicitly permitted by the police, where politicians, media and unions and other organisations sent representatives to support the anti-woman protesters. I was on the rotunda, and I was doused in the tomato juice alongside Kelly J. Keane. I was part of the group of marshals and security who encircled Kelly J in order to get her out of a baying, aggressive, violent mob. We were all physically attacked as we tried to manoeuvre our way through the trans activists, but I wasn't able to continue with the others. I was taken to the ground and I was beaten up by men. If there is a feather in my gender-critical cap, it was at that moment when I was falling to the ground, my decades-long addiction to chocolate finally kicked in, and my fat ass landed on one of the little shits, and I squashed him. He got me back, he punched me and everything, but there is a brief moment of pleasure when I think about the fact that I could well have ruptured his spleen. I eventually managed to get myself back up, and I was able to get out of the crowd to safety, not without continued harassment, but still I got out. Of course, there's a lot more to that story, but that's not for today. It will be told. but not today. It was clear over the coming months that so many people were keen to rewrite history to suit themselves. I had a number of people, for example, tell me they helped me and Kelly J get out, how they were throwing off the TRAs, throwing them across the grounds, getting them off us. I can't speak for Kelly J, but I know for a fact that that's not true for me. And there's a reason that I know that. It's because I was there. It's my experience. No one helped me get out of Albert Park. Just as it's my experience when I returned to work after taking sick leave to recuperate. The previous few months prior to Albert Park, a colleague had found out that I was doing some of the organising for it and insulted me and then gave me the silent treatment ever since. On the day I returned to work, still bruised and limping, I unlocked my office, my own personal office, and found my computer equipment damaged. It was unusable. It was my experience when on that cool autumn day in New Zealand, in the old drafty building, which was my office with dingy net curtains on the smallish window, one of my two colleagues, who had access to my office while I was away, tried to tell me that the autumn sun had streamed through that tiny little window and melted my computer equipment. That job treated me appallingly, unprofessionally, possibly illegally. But one thing they did do right was that they prevented, by managing me out of the organisation, they prevented me from spending months, maybe even years, of working alongside someone with that level of gut-wrenching stupidity. And for that, I'm grateful. A notable moment when I was engaging in a back and forth with HR as they went about managing me out of the organisation was when I sat at my computer looking up the union that I belonged to, that I'd been paying my dues to every week, that I'd belonged to in previous jobs as well, considering whether to ask them for assistance in the employment matters. I realised that that would have been a waste of time and possibly even a bit disastrous for me personally when I realised that they had sent, that same union had actually sent representatives to Albert Park to tacitly support the violence against me and other women on that day. I resigned immediately. Those few moments at Albert Park were nothing but neon lights alerting the way ahead. The silencing of women in New Zealand on that day, the stripping of our rights to speak, gather, associate non-violently, were repeated for me personally. The mob violence of predominantly young men against predominantly middle-aged women, outnumbered 10-1, shocked the country and highlighted a severe case of head in the sand when it came to male against female violence and outright and institutional misogyny. Not to mention the dangerous and insidious coordinated attempts to whitewash it as a day of trans love and joy and standing up for trans rights. No one did this more than the tomato juice thrower Rubashkin, who went on an interview spree, reveling in his success at disrupting the event. This was also supported by Greens MPs. The following 2 years consisted of legal action. Most notably, I saw through the court appearances of Rubashkin with his 2 charges of assault, the subsequent convictions and appeals. The Police Conduct Authority have recently released the report on the review of police performance on that day, which was appalling, absolutely disgusting, and it was clear that a lack of communication, skills, resources and poor intel had contributed to their performance on the day. That's all well and good, but the main factor on that day was the license given to men to silence and beat up women. I wasn't necessarily beaten up by trans activists or trans-identified people. I suspect most of the people were men who just wanted an opportunity to exercise their misogyny with their fists. This event was a massive eye-opener for New Zealand. People who hadn't heard the feminists screaming into the void for years, and there were a lot of people who hadn't heard that, suddenly had the issue staring them in the face. New online groups appeared, existing groups gained members, the movement gained traction. The movement has become very focused. It's purely about gender only, about the kids, about the sports, about women's language and spaces, as opposed to trans rhetoric. Focus is good. It's got strength, but we have to use that strength well. It is not a matter of pure marketing that we reclaim the movement with the suffragettes, with the witches, with the warrior women in history who fought men, who held power, who stood their ground. There have been women who fought for women's empowerment for centuries, only recently being called feminists. This gender critical movement is another iteration of that. Yeah, it's notable for its impact and the speed with which it's made progress, and the techniques used to push its way into social discourse are unique, mainly because of the internet and the money behind it. But still, it's the same fight, just with different weapons and strategies. The children being the most effective pawns to attack women. The best way to distract women from their own disempowerment is to force them to put their resources into safeguarding their children. Don't get me wrong. Do not get me wrong. I am not advocating that we ignore the threats to children's well-being. I am merely advocating for a recognition of what the strategies are and how they are working. We need to know that. We need to be able to recognise that so that we can fight it effectively. It's risky to think of this fight for women's rights as something that will end once we achieve a certain goal, because women's rights doesn't start and stop with gender ideology. A repeal of global sex self-IDs will be wonderful. A fading away of the fad-like quality that lurks around our traumatised young girls, giving them a chance to heal and grow and shine, preferably physically intact and hormonally well endowed, would be fantastic. It would be a coup we'd be buzzing about for decades, and our grandchildren would never hear the end of it. But this gender ideology didn't come out of a vacuum. To expect one or two achieved goals, even on that grander scale, to end an entire social change that we've seen is a simplistic stance. I believe there's a need for caution in who we align with, so we can avoid the pitfalls I see if we don't use a little mindfulness in how we navigate the way ahead. I'm personally not interested in aligning with homophobic, sexist organisations or individuals just because there is a meeting of the minds around gender ideology. There has been recent discourse that the advancement of gender ideology is actually feminism's fault, as in, you wanted equality, so here it is, hope you're happy. Or lesbians' fault, lesbians accepted transsexuals into the gay spaces in the first place, hope you're happy. This is coming from inside the movement. Some very homophobic rhetoric is coming from inside the movement. I've seen gender critical women say we need to remove sex education in its entirety, including reproduction and consent and stuff like that. Removing it in its entirety from the schools because it promotes gay sex. I've constantly seen women repeatedly use the LGBTQ+ acronym, even though I feel like it's repeatedly, consistently and persistently been said that a lot of LGB don't consider themselves part of that acronym, and it's an appropriation of the gay spaces and gay community. I've been told by gender critical women that all gay men are pedophiles. apart from being statistically inaccurate, that's just outright bigotry. The outright hatred is coming from inside the movement. I've seen attacks on sex stereotype non-conforming people purely on how they look. And I don't think that's doing us any favours. And yet this is the general shift that I'm seeing. We're moving away from the foundation of feminism, embracing very conservative values, because the general feeling is that women should align with whoever we can so we can eradicate gender ideology. Full stop. This is not a full stop movement. This movement is full of commas and parentheses, double lines and quote marks and semicolons, and given the amount of crap I keep seeing around, I suspect there's a few colons in there too and all. We state, we backtrack, we argue and debate. We win a little battle, we lose a bigger one, we wade through the propaganda, we utilise it to make our point, we satirise, we scoff, we ignore. Our hearts break, we feel for others, and sometimes we don't care at all. We can't avoid it. This is a messy 2 steps forward, 1 step back journey, full of pitfalls and triumphs. But the fight against women's oppression won't end anytime soon. I recognise the value in different perspectives, but I believe there is a tipping point when we work under differing frameworks, different strategies with one common goal, and there is no unification of other goals. We have to see very clearly where our other goals diverge and the probable impact of that. Put simply, when we agree on gender but nothing else, women's rights in general are still at risk. We can't fight the institutional and woke misogyny of Albert Park anti-women protesters by aligning ourselves with the religious and ultra-conservative misogyny of the likes of the Christian right. We can't keep women's spaces safe from the invasion of men in dresses if we align with those who think women are only allowed in certain spaces because men choose to grant it to them. We're still handing over our power to men no matter what they wear. As I said at the beginning, I was drawn to the movement initially, firstly because gender ideology sounded so incoherent, but also because the arguments on both sides were so disparate. While we were being threatened with stupid, dumb anime, gun-wielding graphics to shut the fuck up, turf, Fond of Beatles on Twitter was describing in specific detail just how human beings differed from clownfish and mould, for those uninitiated in biological reality. And I remember a time when there was a tacit understanding in the movement that we wouldn't stoop to their level, that we wouldn't resort to attacks on individuals minding their own business, Obviously, that doesn't count for men who go into women's spaces. But I'm talking about some dude rocking down the road in his little mini dress. I don't care what you do, mate, as long as you don't come anywhere near me or my spaces. From an optics point of view, it would benefit the gender critical movement if we had stuck with that. Aggressively using the same tactics as those that have been used against women by TRAs does us no favours. To condemn Albert Park and every other violent GC event around the world, which I continue to do, is hypocritical as hell if I sit there and also support male against female intimidation at a fucking library in front of preschoolers just because some bad-tempered blokes also don't agree with gender ideology or drag queens and kings. A few months after Albert Park, I was heading into a supermarket and I had some sort of gender-critical t-shirt on. Coming out of the supermarket at the same time was a trans-identified male. In case I didn't realise that, he had a trans badge on. I realised it. He took one look at me and went, ew, And I took one look at him and went, ugh. And then do you know what happened? We moved the fuck along. He had to get home to make his dinner or something. I had to get into the supermarket and get my stash of chocolate. Keep fighting fit. Neither one of us felt the need to get into a slanging match, because it's not about what one trans-identified person says or thinks, or what one TERF thinks or says, or how any individual chooses to dress. It's about keeping the boundaries high, sticking to the fight against the ideology, keeping women's spaces safe, and empowering women to protect the children. And I still believe that, even though the boundaries were dropped at Albert Park. The fight got physical at Albert Park. I lost my safety at Albert Park, and I was disempowered at Albert Park. Now is not the time for neutrality, for sitting on the fence, for passively allowing this movement to be utilised for other agendas. Now is the time for standing up, for speaking, and for being counted. It's certainly not for sitting around waiting for someone else to come and save us. I got up off the ground at Albert Park and got out. There was no knight in shining armour coming to save me, contrary to popular belief. And there's no company of knights who will save us now. Those who paddle in the tepid bathwaters of neutrality are concentrating on the comfort of their own feet, the ripples in the water, and can't see the coming storm ahead. And I, for one, don't need a knight in shining armour to save me. I posted a number of feminist quotes a few months ago, and the amount of men who came out of the woodwork, supported by gender-critical women sometimes, who felt the need to argue those quotes was interesting. The response was encapsulated with one noddy, and even though this was in text, I'm pretty sure he spoke like this. I agree with you on the trans stuff, but this is bullshit, you feminazi. He couldn't spell feminazi, because God knows we don't want to let a lack of education get in the way of our misogyny in this day and age. However, he did get blocked. I cannot and will not, in good conscience, stand in the trenches with those who are supposedly on my side when it comes to gender ideology, but who also actively promote homophobic, lesbophobic and anti-feminist bullshit, or try to work against us for their own reasons, or try to utilise the movement for their own agenda. It would be foolish of me to stand with men and women who are too busy sharpening knives to shove into my back than to face the coming onslaught in solidarity. And I'm not a fool. I don't care if you know what a woman is. We all know what a woman is. We all know that this attempt to gaslight society into thinking men can be women is fundamentally stupid. But if you don't know how a woman is, how a woman interacts with society, how a woman is conditioned to act, think and feel, or worse, you don't care, then you're working on a shallow level and you're no damn good to me. When you can screech the slogans and in the same breath call for criminalisation of homosexuality or joke about rape or victim blame, you've lost me when you never had me to begin with. I firmly believe that our strength is in ourselves. Parcelling out our power to wolves in sheep's clothing is a mistake, and it's not one that I will be making. So I choose to continue the work and the fight, but I'll do it on my own terms. I will die on the hill, but I will die on my hill. It's a hill where my values and principles trounce the discourse. I'll stake the Labrys flag on top of my hill because I walk under blades, not stolen rainbows. And blades because I like to cut through the shit. My weapons of choice are my ability to think critically, my values, my skills, my voice, my writing. I take my advice from the knowledge, reading and listening of other feminists who went before me and the ones who make sense now. I will die on my hill, and I will die standing in the power of the witch, the power of the dyke, and the power of the woman.